ways are the ways that I'm going to show you because they keep the beads securely where you want them. Let's try and show on the camera here. The beads are on the front of the work and they are not moving to the back side of the work because they are using the one of the two methods that I'm going to teach. Thank you. I would have needed that here in a few minutes. If you use other methods, then the beads slide around to the back side, and perhaps that's okay. Perhaps that's the design element that you want. And if that's the case, then just do with that method. Do whatever method you're doing. Because sometimes you want things to be two-sided, or maybe you're installing a bead more for a weight rather than for a visual thing. So in that case, that's fine. But using one of these methods helps you have weight on the bottom of like a shawl, for example. So if the wind is blowing, your shawl stays down rather than flipping around in all different directions. That's a really good way to do it. Or just for a design element. This is a hat that's got beads on it. And, you know, they'll kind of catch the light when you're wearing it, and it just looks pretty. So Mae Webster has made a couple things too. She's got a beautiful shawl here that she's made. I understand she shared this with you guys last week. And they are all throughout the shawl. It's really pretty. She's used one of the same techniques that I'm teaching so that the beads stay on the front side of the shawl. That way, no matter you know, how you're looking at it, they stay where you can see it all the way through. And then you can get very creative and actually make some really interesting other things. She has jewelry here, and it's the same technique, but using wire instead of yarn. And the technique used, again, puts the beads where you want them without moving to the back side of the work, and they're just really gorgeous. If you have a bit of time here when we're done, stop by up here and take a look, because she's got some really pretty pieces. So we'll start with what I kind of think is the easier method for a number of different reasons. Mostly because I have a tendency when I'm knitting, I maybe watch a little TV or get distracted in a conversation, and then I realize I made a mistake. And it's very easy to go back and fix your mistakes even when you have beads in your knitting when you're using this method. And it is the crochet hook method, which what we have here is a swatch I've started with some beads on it already. And what we're going to do is we knit normally until we get to the column of knitting where you want your bead to be installed. So that's where we're at here. And then we're going to take a very small little crochet hook, and with this hook here, the goal is that we need to be able to have it fit through the bead. And we're going to put the bead on the crochet hook, just like this, and then we're going to transfer, just like a normal slip stitch. We're going to slip it from our working knitting needle onto the crochet hook. So basically just pulling it off. I guess because I'm in the way, aren't I? Okay, let's scoot over here.
It was just a loose cable.
Okay.
No, you are in front of the projector.
Okay. Can we scoot back? This way, that way? I'm not sure what's better. Okay.
Then I'm in the way.
Can people see that now? Yeah. I can't tell without turning around looking, and then I move. Okay, so we moved it from the working needle onto the hook. And we're going to make sure that we place the hook so that the actual mouth of the hook is pointing up. And then we're going to slide that yarn right into the hook here. And then we're going to take our finger and push the bead off of the hook onto the yarn and slide it down towards the work, okay?
On the loop.
Then we're going to return that loop back to the needle, so we're just basically doing a normal slip stitch but the other direction, okay? So now we have our
We need light. We need light. If you want to see, you need light. Sorry.
Is that better?
It's up to you guys. But
So we have the loop with the bead now mounted on the loop. It's pulled through it, back on the needle, and then we're just going to knit normally. So we're going to knit that stitch just like as if it didn't even have a bead on there. So we're going to just go right in there, wrap our yarn. It's kind of falling aside. Pull it through, pop it off. So now we have just a normal stitch. So to sum up, to start over, we knit till we get to the column we want to. We take our crochet hook, we slip the stitch onto the hook, pop the bead off of the hook over the yarn loop, return the yarn loop back to the left needle, and then just knit it normally. And it also works with purling too. You purl it normally if you're in a purl stitch. So, so that's very simple. And if you realize, oh, I made a mistake clear down here and I put it on the wrong stitch, it's not a big deal. You just move right over to the column the same way you would normally do if you were dropping down to fix a mistake stitch. Drop down to it. It's a little bit of a pain if you have a bunch of beads in the way because you have to pull the beads off and put them all back on, but it's all the same technique. It's much easier to fix it than it is if you're using this other second method. Now, hooks and tools, okay? So the goal here is you want the largest hook size possible that you can use, that you can manage to fit through the bead, okay? Because we're gonna, it's dark enough that I actually can't really see the bead very well. Because the goal is to get it to go over, okay? And then when you're talking about beads, you know, they kind of say quality, you kind of get what you pay for. It's worth spending a little bit of money on the beads because if you have a consistently sized hole drilled into the bead, it'll be a lot easier to get your teeny tiny crochet hook through it. If you, Hobby Lobby or Joann's or whatever, those sources produce a bead, right, that you can buy, but if it's not a very consistent bead, it might not have as, you know, in the long run, it's going to be just worth the extra money, okay? Yeah. So, there's another way to do it. If you don't have a hook, and it produces exactly the same results. And what I've done here is I have a very small amount of fishing line. It works with dental floss too. It works with pretty much anything that is small and flexible that you can pull on, okay? But I tell you, this is probably better if you're gonna do like one bead and you don't wanna dig your crochet hook out. It's not something you're gonna wanna do 1,000 beads with because it's kind of pesky. What you're doing in this case is pretty much exactly the same stuff. So we're getting to the point in the project where we have it. We're gonna pull, yeah, unfortunately, because it's fishing line, it's really difficult to see, so I don't think it's going to be something.
Sorry.
There we go. Now I can see. And I just have a scrap of yarn here, but what we're doing is we're putting our working yarn through the hole. We've basically made a U shape with the fishing line. We've threaded the bead over top of the ends of the fishing line. We've poked our working yarn through it, and we're pulling down like this, and now we have our loop that we've created. And then when you're knitting, that loop just goes back on the left side.
Does that help any with white? No.
I'm not sure.
No. All right.
That's a good thought.
So as long as, any way you can pull it through the bead is what you're looking for, okay? The hook honestly is the easiest, but if you just are in a pinch, you can't find your hook, maybe you lost it, I'm prone to doing that, you can make it work with dental floss or fishing line or anything, but the hook's easier. The second method is one where we have, again, you knit like normal till you get to the column where you want your bead to be installed. Which, hold on here, I'm almost at the end of this row. We knit like normal till we get to the column where we want, but ahead of time, before we start this method, we have to do some, before we even start the project, we have to do something different here. At the beginning of your project, you use a big beading needle that has a large eye, and again, it's very small. Maybe I'll just show you the picture here. So it's a very skinny needle. And when you separate the needle, I'll get it opened up here for you and then you can see, there is a very large eye. It's kind of dark.
Yeah, it's against a light background.
Against the light background? Okay, yeah, there we go. So, poke your yarn through there at the beginning of your project. This is before you've even cast it on, okay? We're gonna thread your yarn through here, thread all of the beads for the entire project onto it, and I just have a already threaded section here, okay? So we've threaded on, thread all of them on there. So in other words, if your project is going to take 500 beads, you do have to thread 500 of them onto here.
And if I can interject something, if you have to put 500 beads on your yarn, you're gonna wear out the front end of that yarn too.
Yes,
It gets really raggedy.
yeah. So the needle really helps because you can pull it through here. Yes,
Also, if you put 500 beads on and you have to slide them down every time,
that's
you
going to put some wear on your
sometimes they get stuck and they won't move because you gotta pull the yarn through.
Yep.
So don't string 500 because you have to change skeins of yarn usually anyway.
That's true, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I
so,
learned that from experience.
yeah. Now, okay, so what if you
That's
don't,
why you buy good yarn, good beads too.
good beads, yeah, because then the hole sizes are more consistent and they'll slide better. The other thing is, okay, so say you get knitting and you realize that you did not string enough on. Let's say you're like, okay, I know I'm going to have to switch skeins, so I'm only going to do half of them now and half of them later. It is not the end of the world. You can always just break the yarn and string some more on and then just continue knitting. It's just this, you just have 2 more loose ends to weave in. So I hate weaving in loose ends, but sometimes it's worth it. Probably weaving in 2 more loose ends is easier than doing 500 at once. So, all right, so we've threaded our needle. We have strung on however many beads we think we're going to need. We are knitting along until we get to the point where we need it. Sorry, I'm just at the beginning of the row here. I just need to get down to like where the column is. Okay, so we have reached the column that we are interested in having our bead at, okay? We bring the yarn between the needles to the front of the work, just like a normal, like if you're gonna purl. Okay, so now the yarn is in the front. And then we take from our string of beads here that we have pre-strung, slide the top one all the way up. So now it is up here by the needle. And then we're just going to do a normal slip stitch. So just pass it from one side to the other. And then put the yarn back to either the front or back of the work, depending on whether the next stitch is a knit or a purl, and then you keep working. So it's a little more pesky because you have to string them all ahead of time, but it's easier in that you're not constantly having to pull them through with the crochet hook. So let me, yes, okay. So we get to the point where we want the bead to be at. We slide the top bead up from the bottom. So now we just hold it right up here next to the work with your finger, and then just do a slip stitch. So this stitch is actually slipped over, and then after that we just put the yarn back and keep knitting in the next stitch. So the pattern in this case has to incorporate slip stitches or it's not going to work. So if your pattern will indicate whether you're needing to have a crochet hook or whether you're going to do slip stitches, and then you know what tools you need. So the next stitch in this case, in this particular pattern, is just a knit stitch. So I will complete the next stitch and then you can see what it looks like here. Try and get this. So the column here is the column that has the slip stitches, and then the next knit stitch is the stitch that basically secures it and holds it in place. So it could be a knit or it could be a purl. But when you're doing your slip stitch, you want to make sure you have the yarn in front, because that's what makes your bead visible and keeps it, mounted where you want it to be. Sorry. Questions so far? So then you keep knitting along the pattern until you get to where you want the next one. Bring the yarn back to the front, slide up the bead up to the next spot, and then just do a slip stitch and then just keep knitting after that. So, so if you're thinking about, boy, I really like beads and I want to put them in a pattern, and let's say you have a pattern you already like that does not incorporate beads, probably you're going to have a better time figuring out how to put them in a spot where you like them with the crochet hook method, because otherwise you have to amend the pattern somehow to include slip stitches. So the crochet hook method is probably going to be your go-to method unless the pattern tells you otherwise. And that's the first method I showed you with the green beads on the sample here. So,
Have you heard of the Flegel needle?
yes, so the Flegel beater is basically a fancy crochet hook. You can string a whole bunch of them onto it. It's got like a stopper at the end so they don't fall off the other end.
36, the one from Miss Babs, the 6-inch needle will hold 36 size 6 beads.
Right. And basically what that saves you from doing is just going back and getting a new one between every go. It works, so does a regular hook.
There
you know,
are other
so.
versions of it, like Laces has one.
Yeah. Yeah, so it works, but it does exactly, it's the same technique, same method. If you have it and you like it, keep using it because there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, you know. But if you don't, and you already have a small steel crochet hook and it fits through the bead that you want to install, then there's no reason to buy another thing necessarily. Bead size, you can fit a lot of different sizes, different weights of yarn through the beads. So you're not just limited to fingering weight yarn. So if you're thinking, oh, I'd really like to make a beaded shawl, but I don't want to do it because they all have fingering weight yarn, that's not necessarily true. This is sport weight, and some of these are worsted weight even. I'm not sure, I think it was this red and purple.
I think all of them are.
All of them, okay. So you can pull sport weight yarn through the 6/0 needle, or bead I mean, which are the size, when you, if you all at the end want to come up and take a look at stuff that we can kind of see and I can talk individually with you. But most of these beads are that size, and they will fit through yarn that thick. And it doesn't look like it, but it does. It's really, it compacts down pretty good. Fingering weight yarn will definitely fit through the next size smaller, which is 8/0, which are these beads. And you can fit lace weight yarn, which I even brought a skein of it. You can fit lace weight yarn through the 11/0 beads, which are the smaller size that you're realistically going to be able to use. You just have to have a very, very small crochet hook, which I'm not sure you're really going to be able to see this.
Or that's when you use the fishing line.
Yeah, or the fishing line. But to be honest, that's if I'm doing a lace weight or a cobweb shawl, that's really, really a lot of beads and a lot of very small yarn, so I probably would use this still. Which this is just a Addy crochet hook. It's just got a cool cap on it. That way you don't poke yourself with the hook accidentally.
What size is the hook?
Very small. It is a US 18 1/2 millimeter. Very small. Yeah. So the other thing I have here, and if you bring up your cell phones when you come up, I have a little card. I don't have enough to like pass out, but I have 2 written here. Snap a picture of it, and it tells you. Now it only tells you for this particular brand, but this is a very common brand that you can find a lot of different sources. And good quality beads that are really consistent too, so you're not going to be struggling with trying to pull them onto your work like you might with a less expensive bead. But snap a photo of this because it's got the size of the hole, the size of the bead, the diameter of the bead, and then what kind of crochet hook size you need to buy to have go with it too. So you know exactly what you need based on this size of bead right here. So, questions so far? Okay, so I invite y'all to come up and take a look at stuff and try it out if you'd like. I have these samples here, and I have beads ready to go. If anybody would like to try it, I will work you through it before you leave. So come on up.
Sorry.
We ran out of the flyers. Did you show them that we have a link? But if somebody needs one,
Okay.
contact somebody else.
So many of you have received